They arrested me for livestock noise pollution on my own damn ranch, surrounded by cows that trust me more than the deputy reading my Miranda rights, and all because one woman, Miranda Blake, self-declared HOA president and full-time menace in white, decided my barn didn't match her Malibu standards. I was milking cows one week, and the next I'm being treated like I'm running a criminal enterprise out of a pasture. If you think I'm making this up, buckle up. Because this isn't a story about cows or code violations. This is a story about how a woman with a clipboard and a God complex tried to bulldoze my life, and how she ended up digging her own grave with it. My name's Jesse Callahan. I bought Silver Hollow Ranch 7 years ago when I got out of the Marine Corps. Back then, it wasn't a ranch. It was a beat-up patch of Texas dirt with a shack, some tumbleweeds, and enough rusted fencing to make a tetanus museum. But I saw something here. I didn't inherit land. I didn't marry into money. I earned every damn acre with calloused hands and a spine held together by caffeine and stubbornness. I laid pipe in the dark after construction shifts. I rebuilt barns that collapsed in storms. I planted trees, not for shade, but for legacy. I buried my dog under the old oak tree. I carved my name into a beam with my dad's knife. I scattered my brother's ashes on the East Hill. This land isn't some zip code to me. It's bone deep. My days were the kind you don't see on TV, but they mattered. Up before sunrise, milk the cows, fix the fence, clear the troughs, chase off a coyote or two, end the day with a beer and the sound of Holsteins chewing like they pay rent. My herd of 12 Holsteins kept me afloat, supplying milk to local grocers and farmers markets. I wasn't rich, but I was free. I wasn't fancy, but I was honest. And in a world full of filters and curated lives, I figured that was enough. Until the drone came, hovering over my barn like it had a warrant. At first, I laughed it off, maybe some bored teenager or real estate scout, but it kept coming. Same time, same path, every morning, always watching. And call me paranoid, but I've been watched before. And this wasn't curiosity. This was surveillance. Then came Miranda Blake, a woman who looked like she got lost on the way to a wine tasting and ended up on my gravel road. She pulled up in a Tesla so white it made my pickup look like a relic, stepped out in heels that had sunk in manure, introduced herself with a smile that belonged on a magazine cover next to the words, "New money, new problems." She told me she was my new neighbor, built a $2,300,000 0-cents ranch-style home half a mile upwind. Then, like she was asking if I wanted to carpool, she asked if I'd consider selling my ranch. Said it would enhance the landscape for her garden expansion. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, this land's not for sale. It never will be." Her smile didn't move, but something behind it shifted, like I'd just said no to a loan shark in yoga pants. I figured that was the end of it. That's not how women like Miranda operate. They don't take no, they gentrify around it. The next morning, I spotted her in my pasture with a tape measure and a notebook, scribbling down notes like she was doing a cattle audit. "Just getting to know the neighborhood," she called out, standing in the middle of my herd like she belonged there. That's when it all clicked. But the notebook, the measuring tape, the way she studied my barn like it was an eyesore in her real estate portfolio, none of that was neighborly. That drone hadn't been random. Someone had been studying my land, learning my patterns, mapping every inch of my life like I was a problem that needed solving. That's when I knew Miranda Blake wasn't just here to plant roses. She was planting a takeover. What I didn't know was how far she'd already gone. The first real shot in her war came exactly 1 week later, sealed in an envelope delivered by a nervous mailman and thick enough to bruise a table. That's when the paperwork started talking louder than the cows. The first real shot fired didn't come with warning lights or lawyers. It came in the mail, certified, thick as a sandwich, from an HOA I'd never heard of, with a name that sounded like it was made up by a marketing intern. Blakewood Acres Homeowners Association. I opened it standing in my kitchen with mud still on my boots. 23 pages of violations, 23 pages of legal nonsense that accused me of everything, from offensive barn aesthetics to early morning livestock sound disruptions. Apparently, cows mooing at dawn was now a noise complaint. I don't know who she hired to write these charges, but I'd never seen a thesaurus used to bully someone so politely. And at the bottom, like a cherry on a bureaucratic sundae, a fine of $1,500.00, payable in 30 days. Signed, of course, by Miranda Blake, chairwoman. Now, for context, there has never been an HOA out here. That's the whole point of being this far outside city limits. We're where folks come to get away from those power-hungry paper pushers who think property lines are invitations to micromanage. So I did what any rancher with sense would do. I called Jim Patterson, my neighbor down the road who's been living here since Reagan was in office. Jim laughed so hard I thought he might choke on his coffee. "Jesse," he said, "there ain't never been no HOA out here. That's why we moved here in the first place." That gave me hope for about 20 minutes. Because then I called the Johnsons, a sweet couple who live a quarter-mile east, and the tone changed. Mrs. Johnson sounded nervous. Real nervous. Like she knew she'd just signed something she didn't understand. She told me Miranda had come by with cookies, said she was organizing something to protect property values and keep the community safe, said it was just paperwork, nothing binding. Nothing would really change, but I knew that tone. That's the tone of someone who got conned and was too embarrassed to admit it. By the time I called the third neighbor and heard the same story, cookies, smiles, a promise to maintain neighborhood standards, my stomach turned. I wasn't just being fined, I was being outmaneuvered. While I was at the feed store loading hay, Miranda had been walking house to house, clipboard in one hand, sugar in the other, selling fear and frosting. And the worst part? People bought it. Not because they're bad people, but because she came wrapped in all the right signals. Polished, professional, polite. That's how control moves in these days. Not in tanks, but in Teslas. She didn't steal anything. She offered it, and people handed over their rights with crumbs on their shirts. That afternoon, I drove past Jim's place and waved. He waved back, but when I drove past the Johnsons, they looked away, didn't even make eye contact. That stung more than the fine. These were folks I'd fixed fences for, shared beers with, helped during storms. Now I was the problem neighbor because some blonde in yoga pants told them their property value depended on me repainting my barn. It was like I'd been voted off an island I didn't know we were even living on. Not with a trial, but with Tupperware full of snickerdoodles. So I did what I do best. I read every damn page, every regulation, every clause, and I realized something dangerous. It all looked legal. The logo, the formatting, the language. It was built to scare people like me into compliance. But under the shine, it was toothless. It only worked if people believed it. And the second they stopped asking questions, the illusion became reality. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just playing legal games. She was playing psychological warfare. And if I didn't do something fast, I wasn't just going to lose money. I was going to lose the right to live on my own land the way I'd built it. But this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about trust, community, and how quickly it could all be undone by one person with a vision board and a fake title. I wasn't facing a neighbor, I was facing a campaign. And I had a feeling this campaign had only just begun, because the cookies, that was just step one. The camera crews came next. It started like every good ambush, quiet, official-looking, and full of false confidence. 3 men stepped onto my property wearing suits too clean for real work and shoes too shiny for real soil. One of them, tall with a thin mustache and the voice of a DMV clerk, introduced himself as Mr. Crenshaw from Environmental Compliance Services. He flashed a badge so generic it might have come from a Halloween aisle. "We're here for a routine agricultural inspection following multiple community complaints." Community complaints? That was rich. I had more cows than neighbors, and the cows weren't the ones signing HOA petitions. I asked for a warrant. He gave me a business card. I asked what agency he worked for. He responded with 3 syllables of acronym soup. Then they got to work, measuring fence distances, poking soil with plastic probes, taking pictures of my barn like they were filming a crime scene for CSI Cow Edition. One of them even tapped on my water pump like he was checking for explosives. The whole thing had a rhythm to it, like they'd rehearsed it a dozen times, but nothing they did felt real. It wasn't inspection, it was imitation, and not even a good one. Still, I stayed calm, because nothing makes frauds sweat faster than patience. And right on cue, like the villain in a low-budget movie, Miranda appeared. She came strolling across my pasture in a perfectly white outfit, heels stabbing into the soil like she owned it. "Oh my, I saw the official vehicles and wanted to make sure everything was all right," she cooed, smiling like she wasn't 2 seconds from breaking into applause. Mr. Crenshaw straightened up like a soldier spotting his commander. "Mrs. Blake, yes. We're finishing the preliminary report you requested." Requested, not reported, not witnessed. Requested. That's when I knew this wasn't an inspection, it was a performance. And she was the director. They wrapped up 2 hours later with a fresh list of violations I'd never heard of. Unauthorized fence placement, excessive groundwater saturation risk, non-compliant architectural elements. That last one, it meant my barn was too rustic for the imaginary HOA standards. When I asked for a copy of their findings, Crenshaw gave me the same tight-lipped smirk people use when they're bluffing at poker. "You'll receive an official copy via certified mail." Then they drove off without another word, leaving behind a trail of boot prints and bullshit. That night, I sat down with that flimsy business card and started digging. The address, an empty lot behind a closed gas station. The phone number, straight to a disconnected voicemail. The website, registered 2 weeks ago, full of buzzwords and stock images of people shaking hands over clipboards. It was faker than a Hollywood cowboy hat. I wasn't just dealing with a bad neighbor, I was dealing with someone who'd built an entire theater of control. Fake HOA, fake inspectors, real consequences, and all of it designed to make me look like the problem so she could offer herself as the solution. That's when I realized I wasn't being treated like a neighbor anymore. I was being treated like a target, not someone to reason with, but someone to remove. She wasn't collecting complaints. She was building a case. And if I didn't start fighting smarter, the next knock on my door might not be from actors. It might be from cops who didn't know the script was fake. Stay with me, because the next knock came sooner than I thought. And this time, they came with handcuffs. 3 days after the fake inspection circus left my property, I marched up Miranda's pristine driveway, ready to end the nonsense. I wasn't angry. I was surgical. I had printouts, screenshots, company registry records, evidence proving her environmental inspectors were as fake as her HOA charter. She opened the door in her signature all-white outfit, smiling like I'd just brought her a fruit basket instead of a folder full of fraud. "Clay, what a pleasant surprise," she said, her voice soaked in syrup. "I hope you're here to talk solutions." I said I was. But I should have known she wasn't looking for a conversation, she was waiting for a trigger. What I didn't see were the 2 friends she'd planted in the garden, conveniently within earshot, or that her phone was already recording before I said a word. I laid out my case, calm and clear, told her I knew about the inspectors, the phony HOA filings, the staged complaints. She smiled and played coy, like I was accusing her of stealing cable. Then, with a voice loud enough for the gallery to hear, she said, "Clay, I really think you need to calm down. Threatening me isn't going to solve anything." I blinked. "I haven't threatened anyone," I replied, but the trap had already closed. Every word from that point on was paint for her canvas, a canvas she'd been sketching for weeks. She didn't need me to lose my temper, she just needed me to look like I might. Half an hour later, while I was out back feeding my cows, 2 sheriff's vehicles rolled up my driveway. Deputy Mike Collins stepped out, eyes low, voice tight. "Clay Dempsey?" he asked, like we hadn't shared a beer at the county fair 3 summers ago. "You're being placed under arrest for harassment and making terroristic threats." I laughed. Honest to God, laughed. Until I saw the second deputy's hand resting on his taser. "Mike," I said, "this is insane. You know me." He looked down like he couldn't meet my eyes. "I've got a recording and 2 witness statements," he said quietly. "You threatened her, Clay." That was all it took. A manipulated audio file, a rehearsed script, and 2 complicit voices. They cuffed me in front of my cattle like I was some unhinged lunatic. That sting? It wasn't from the cuffs. It was from watching Miranda watch me. Smiling. The county jail wasn't part of my weekend plans, but it ended up being the education I didn't know I needed. My cellmate was a wiry old man with a handshake like saddle leather. Name was Earl Donovan. I barely got my story out before he paled. "Did you say Miranda Blake?" he asked, sitting down hard on his bunk. "Blonde, fancy shoes, talks like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth?" I nodded. Earl exhaled like someone let the air out of a decade-old wound. "She destroyed my life 2 years ago," he said, his voice trembling, not with rage, but with memory. Earl used to run a small horse ranch about 5 miles west of mine, specialized in healing injured horses, had clients driving in from out of state. She moved in next door, he said, started complaining about the smell, the noise, the impact on her wellness center. First came the HOA, then the inspectors, then the fines. "She got me arrested twice," he whispered, "both times for threats I never made. The third time, his insurance dropped him, his clients fled, his income vanished. I ended up selling my land for half its value. To her." He smiled bitterly. "She turned my barn into a rustic event space, still has my father's branding iron nailed to the wall. As decor." His voice cracked. "My family worked that land for 3 generations. Now it's a backdrop for wine tastings and yoga retreats." That's when it clicked. Miranda didn't just want my acreage. She wanted the story, the authenticity, the weathered charm, the local color that made her weekend guests feel like pioneers. But she didn't want the people who built it, just their leftovers, their land, their memories, stripped, repackaged, and monetized. Like culture taxidermy, she wasn't erasing the past, she was selling it. And we weren't obstacles, we were product. The barns, the fences, the names on the deeds, all of it was branding for her lifestyle portfolio. I lay on that hard jail mattress that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing this wasn't just about me. It never had been. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. She'd done it before. She had a system. She moved like a corporation, but smiled like a neighbor. And for the first time in my life, I understood what real power looks like when it hides behind manners and money. I wasn't just going to defend my land anymore. I was going to burn her whole blueprint to the ground, with the one thing she couldn't fake, the truth. And I knew exactly where to start. Because if Miranda's greatest weapon was performance, then I was about to give her an audience she couldn't control. Stay with me. Because what came next wasn't a protest. It was a trap. 2 days after I got out of jail, I made a phone call with the fakest tone of defeat I could manage. "Miranda, this is Jesse. I've been thinking. I just can't fight this anymore." I let my voice crack just enough to sound like a man on the edge. "If you're still interested in the ranch, maybe we can talk." The pause on the other end of the line was the longest 3 seconds I'd ever heard. Then came a breath, sharp and excited, like a dog hearing its leash jingle. "Oh, Jesse, I'm so glad you called," she said, practically glowing through the phone. "I'd love to help you transition out gracefully." Translation: she thought I was finally broken, but I wasn't breaking. I was baiting. She showed up less than an hour later. White blouse, white pants, white teeth, like she was going to a brunch. Themed crime scene. She brought a leather portfolio thicker than my first mortgage, and walked in like she'd just won a prize goat at the state fair. I offered her coffee. She declined, probably afraid of country germs. We sat at my kitchen table, same one I'd built from scrap oak the year I moved in. I hit record on the phone in my shirt pocket, leaned back like a man who'd given up, and said, "So, what do I need to know?" I didn't have to press. Like all good con artists, she loved talking about her brilliance. Miranda began to lay it all out like she was giving a TED Talk to an invisible board of investors. She spoke of acquisition strategies, compliance structures, and psychological pressure points. She admitted she'd used staged complaints, hired actors, and loopholed HOA procedures to motivate low-value property owners to exit gracefully. I nodded, wide-eyed, as if she were curing cancer. She bragged about community asset optimization, which in plain English meant stealing land by dressing the theft in legal costume jewelry. "You'd be surprised how effective cookies can be," she chuckled. "Fear dressed up as friendliness gets you a long way in these parts." She didn't even blink. She thought she was in full control. Every word she said was digging her own hole deeper. And she didn't stop. She detailed her portfolio of past acquisitions, a horse ranch, a goat farm, a family orchard, all of them flipped or leveled to match her vision. She even admitted to planting surveillance gear, for community safety, of course. The more I nodded, the more she revealed. It wasn't an interview. It was a confession disguised as a lecture. She wasn't just trying to buy my land, she was pitching a masterclass on how she'd stolen everyone else's. I kept her talking, because the longer she talked, the more the law would have to listen later. And then, right as she was explaining how she faked evidence of my mental instability to justify the last arrest, she glanced toward the window. Her eyes narrowed, her mouth froze. "Clay, is that a camera?" she asked, pointing to a small dome tucked under the roof eave. I smiled. Not wide, just enough. "Oh, that? Yeah. After the arrest, I figured it was smart to protect myself, community safety." Her chair scraped back. The confidence melted off her like sunscreen in July. "How long has that been there?" she snapped, her voice no longer polite. "Did it record this conversation?" I tilted my head and said calmly, "Miranda, I thought you said everything you're doing is perfectly legal. Nothing to hide, right?" She stood up, slamming her portfolio shut like she could stuff her words back inside, but it was too late. The trap wasn't just set, it had snapped. Every sentence, every smug admission, every self-congratulatory phrase, captured, on video, on audio, backed up to 3 drives and 2 friends I trust more than my bank. And now she knew it. Stay with me. Because the moment she stormed out, I knew something else too. Someone that arrogant wasn't gonna go down quiet. She was going to panic. And panic makes predators clumsy. Sure enough, it didn't take long. At exactly 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up with motion alerts from every corner of my property. I rolled over in bed, checked the feed, and there she was. Miranda Blake, dressed head to toe in black like she was auditioning for an off-brand Mission Impossible. She was creeping along the fence line, carrying what looked like a gas can in one hand and a camera in the other. Subtlety wasn't her strong suit. I watched from the safety of my living room while she cut through the barbed wire I'd just repaired, poured accelerant around the barn, and started taking photos of her own sabotage, a performance staged under moonlight for a 911 call she hadn't made yet. But every move she made was being recorded in full infrared clarity from 4 different angles. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted to finish the job. Frame me as a danger to myself and others, claim I'd snapped, and walk away with her HOA queen reputation intact. Her final touch, smashing my water pump, then calling emergency services and whispering into the phone like she was reporting a hostage situation. "Yes, it's Jesse Dempsey. I'm really worried about his state of mind. He's destroying his own property. There's gasoline everywhere. He might hurt himself." That was her story. Problem is, I had the truth, and this time it came with timestamps and thermal imaging. I called Deputy Mike Collins directly. "Mike, you're going to want to get over here fast, but quiet. Miranda Blake is on my property right now committing 4 different felonies in real time, and I've got every second on camera." To his credit, Mike didn't waste time asking questions. 10 minutes later, his cruiser and another unit came flying up the dirt road, lights off, sirens silent. I watched on camera as Miranda spun around like a startled raccoon when the spotlight hit her mid-sabotage, gas can still in hand. She tried to run, tripped in the mud and was tackled before she could even scream. This time, she didn't smile. She snarled. They cuffed her right there in the sledge, charged her with criminal mischief, attempted arson, destruction of property, filing a false police report, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her HOA? Declared illegitimate and dissolved within the week. That stack of fines she tried to bury me under? Legally void. The footage of her confession and her 1 a.m. performance became key evidence in a multi-agency investigation. Turns out she'd pulled this stunt in 2 other counties, and they were lining up to press charges. Miranda didn't just lose the game, she face-planted on her own chessboard, dragging her queen's crown through the mud. But the real payoff came after. My neighbors, those who once avoided my eyes, started showing up one by one. The Johnsons brought a pie and an apology. Jim Patterson brought tools and helped me patch the fence. Folks I hadn't talked to in months stopped by with fence posts, hay bales, even a 6-pack or 2. Turns out they'd all been quietly threatened, coerced, or charmed by Miranda in some form, and seeing her in the back of a squad car reminded them of something they'd forgotten. Around here, we take care of our own, not sell each other out for garden upgrades and empty promises. My community didn't just come back, it came back stronger. And this time, it was wide awake. Miranda's mansion went up for sale within a month, but no one wanted it. Too much bad history, too much press. Her name was mud from Malibu to Midland. Lawsuits followed. Former victims came out of the woodwork. Real estate licenses revoked, bank accounts frozen. She moved back to California, last I heard, living with a cousin under a different last name. Meanwhile, I kept my land. My cows kept mooing. And my mailbox? It now has a new sign next to it. This property is under 24-hour video surveillance. HOA schemes will be prosecuted politely. There's a lot I could say to wrap this up, but here's the truth. Loud people win short fights. Patient people win long ones. Miranda used paperwork, charm, and weaponized cookies to take what she wanted. I used truth, persistence, and 4 well-placed cameras to take it back. Some folks think justice comes from courtrooms, but sometimes it comes from a muddy pasture and a town that finally remembered who they are. My cows, they knew who the real liar was the whole time, and this time so did the law. And maybe that's what this was really about, not just keeping a ranch, but remembering who I am when someone tries to rewrite my life with fake rules and a forced smile. Miranda thought I was just another stubborn old rancher, too tired to fight. What she didn't know was that Marines don't fold. They adapt. And out here, we don't scream to be heard. We document, we wait, and then we let the truth walk in wearing boots. If you've made it this far, I hope you take one thing from my story. It's not the loudest voice that wins, it's the one that endures. I didn't beat Miranda with muscle. I beat her with patience, with proof, and with people who finally remembered what real community means. So if you've ever had to deal with an HOA nightmare, a fake authority, or someone trying to take what you built, know this. You're not alone, and you're not powerless. Just be smart. Be steady, and when the time comes, be ready to make the truth louder than their lies. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, leave a comment with your own HOA horror story, or tell us what moment hit you the hardest. And if you want more real stories where justice takes the long way around but still gets there, subscribe to the channel. We've got more coming. And trust me, it only gets crazier from here.